Witches really exist. A few years back, with a backpack and an insatiable curiosity, I ventured into Eastern Europe. I did a lot of traveling, and my journey took me to the winding roads of Romania, and eventually, to a village so remote it felt like stepping into another era. Time felt like it stood still there. Cobblestone streets snaked through the settlement, and houses looked like they carried centuries of history with them. On my second evening, after spending the day absorbing the village's history, I found myself wandering its narrow pathways. That's when I met her. An old woman. Her face was a map of wrinkles. Her long, silver hair flowed like a river down her back, contrasting starkly with her dark, almost void eyes. Those eyes seemed to hold millennia of experiences. Draped in faded shawls, she had a necklace that intrigued me. It had symbols and charms that looked ancient. As I walked by, she stepped into my path, her voice very old and crackling. "Lost, young man?" "No," I responded, trying to retain my composure. "I'm just exploring the place." She studied me for a moment. Her gaze felt penetrating. It was clear that I wasn't from around there, and it's almost like she took delight in that. It was weird. "A charm, perhaps," she said as she held out her hand. "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any money," I replied back. I didn't really think my answer through too much. A tourist? In the middle of nowhere? With no money? I wasn't being truthful, and I think she knew it. "That's okay," she said. "Just take it." As I looked down at her hand, I stumbled through possible excuses not to in my head. "I can't possibly," I said. "I don't—" But before I could finish, she cut me off. "Take it now," she said. The request had now turned into a demand. I was so uncomfortable. I just wanted to leave, but it was apparent that she wasn't going to let me unless I took this charm. As I grabbed it from her hand, she muttered something under her breath. I couldn't tell you what she said, but it left me with an uneasy feeling. "Thank you," I said to her. "It's my pleasure," she replied with a sly grin as she turned and walked away. It was one of the weirdest encounters I had ever had. Not wanting it to weigh on me the rest of the day, I tried to put the encounter behind me and go about my business. That night was weird. I had an intense dream. I was lost in a thick forest, and the old woman was there, but younger. She was chanting in some ancient language, surrounded by shadows. I was terrified. I tried to shout and then run, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt trapped, like something was holding me down. I woke up freaked out, heart racing. I was sweating profusely and panting for breath. I've never experienced anything like it before in my life. The rest of the day, I walked around with this heavy, ominous weight on me. It's hard to describe, but it felt like this dark presence was pressing down on me from every angle. That night was just as bad as the previous. I had terrible nightmares. I was in the forest again. Shadows and eyes from unknown creatures watched me. It was horrifying. The next morning I decided to ask around about the old woman. The reactions I got were a mix of fear and pity. Nobody wanted to talk to me about her. Finally, an older man, probably in his 70s, finally filled me in. The village had this legend about a witch from centuries ago. She was blamed for everything from failed crops to missing children, and was eventually banished. But before she left, she promised she'd be back. Over the years, there were stories of outsiders like me encountering an old woman who would give them a charm and then haunt their dreams. Locals have never actually seen the woman, but outsiders often have encounters with her. I could feel my blood run cold as he told me this story. Could this actually be happening? It sounded crazy to me, but at the same time, the 2 previous nights had been unlike anything I've ever experienced. I told the old man about the charm that she gave me. "Throw it into the forest, immediately," he said with a tone of seriousness in his voice. I didn't need to be told twice. I did as he said, and as I returned to the village, it was like the ominous weight that had been bearing down on my shoulders was lifted. I'm not one to scare easily, but this was too much. I packed my bags and left the next day. That night, there were no nightmares. It was one of the craziest and creepiest experiences I've ever had in my life. All I can say is, whether you believe in them or not, there's some seriously unexplainable stuff out there. As for me, I'm convinced witches really exist.